Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to digital transformation, and we always have an expert panel here. And for today, we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic that is going to be accounts payable. Last week, we did accounts receivable. So this is going to be really from the vendor's perspective. So we are going to have a lot of fun discussing that. Before we do that, we are going to start with everybody's intros. I am going to start with my intro. If you don't know me, I am Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm, and accounts payable is always a very interesting topic. Chris, I don't know if you are able to speak. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Chris Gherardini. I'm the CEO and owner of Turnkey Technologies. We're a 28-year-old partner that implements Microsoft Dynamics ERP. So yes, AP is a very large topic, in fact, as you'll hear shortly. Thanks for having me.
Exactly. It can get really large. So we are going to touch that from different perspectives. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Abu, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Sure. My name's Abu. I'm the founder and president here at Penny. So we are a Sage X3 partner for the last 12 years. Personally, I've been involved in a lot of finance-related projects, and AP is one of those areas where I've worked quite a bit. So excited to be here and look forward to speaking.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Abu. Nirav, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, absolutely. Nirav Shah, I'm CEO of EdSurge ERP. We're a premier Acumatica partner and doing ERP implementations for over 20 years now. You know, like they say, everything rolls downhill. And AP is one of those areas where if it's not done properly, you're going to have some really mad vendors. So I'm excited to talk about this topic today.
Yeah, could not agree more. Thank you so much for being here, Nirav. Matt, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
I'm Matt Bernot. I'm the lead business analyst with Striven. It's the ERP owned by Miles Technologies, a full services IT firm. And I love talking about AP because, again, vendors are important. Can't run your business if you don't have the things that your vendors give you to get there. So love AP for that.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Matt. And if you're in the audience and joining for the first time, make sure you guys post your questions and comments in the comment box. We typically try to cover them during the show. If you run out of time, then our panelists will make sure that you guys are going to receive your answers. On that note, I am going to start with the first question with Chris. And Chris, this is going to be our standard, segment where we are setting the stage. Overall, in terms of account payable, most people, when they are going to be thinking about accounts payable, they are thinking, okay, you hire vendors, you sort of pay the vendors, but you know how complex it could get when you look at the end-to-end processes. In fact, you are probably going to have dedicated systems just to manage your AP processes. That's how complex it could get. So do you want to set the stage for
Sure,
AP?
appreciate it. And to the rest of you, just because I mentioned a topic doesn't mean you can't deep dive on it later. So, but I started by just doodling and I wrote payables and I put voucher, right? And then what that means in our world is that's when you put an invoice in the system. And then I went backwards and I thought, well, before you voucher it, could be, a PO. It was a PO based invoice, which means there should have been a three-way match in front of that voucher. In fact, the three-way match would create the voucher. So there's some arrows coming off the three-way matches, you can imagine, as you start tripping over variances and pricing and discrepancies and quantity discrepancies and inspections and defects. Boy, that one goes way that way. We keep going north, receipts, right? We're receiving process as part of it as well because it's creating something to invoice against. And then we go up to the purchase order, right? So the great AP processes, they start with something. There should be a purchase order there. That doesn't mean that's the beginning of the process, but that's a great place to start because when you have a purchase order, you have a commitment. You know what the general ledger impact is of that payable and or that purchase. And moreover, again, you know where it goes and you know if you have budget to buy it. A lot of things happen if you have that discipline. But as we get to a purchase order, if you think about what could happen before that, well, it's a requisition. It has to be a rec before it turns into a purchase order. And then you think about, well, how did we get to a requisition? We had a request for quotation process, right? So now we even went up. So payables, right? And even before we get to that request for quotation, you're like, okay, what are we trying to buy? And it touches products and who are the vendors that make or sell that product. And do I have requirements for vendors? So payables can go way back up to vendor selection, even before they bid on it, to see if they meet requirements. Are they U.S. based? Are they U.S. citizens based? Defense related? You have this, OSHA, There's a lot. So even vendor authorization certification processes compliance can be complex in the relationship between vendors and products, right? Who do I buy it from? How many do I buy? So that's all AP, right? Because as it comes downhill, as we heard from our co-people here, is yes, it all rolls to AP. So if it's screwed up on the front end, we end up with it. So again, and it goes from there, right? That vouchering. Well, how did I get the invoice? Did it come in via email? Was it an OCR? Was it an EDI? We can have AP flying all over the place, right? POs, receipts. I got a 3PL. That could complicate my AP process because, I'm receiving goods and hits general ledger, right? Now we have a little balance sheet area that gets tricky for people where you think about what's received but not invoiced, right? When do I accrue that liability on my balance sheet? So it's not just as simple as putting in an invoice again. And again, we talked about variance, we talked about returns, you talk about exception management. And I got a great story for you. I mean, I'm going to leave. There's a lot of other stuff. I didn't even go to, well, how do we pay people, right? You can say credit cards and ACH, but you guys need topics. But I have a great story. We had this client that had a disconnected point of sale platform from their ERP, 1,700 locations. And then they're buying parts for trucks. And so if you think about what's happening on this disconnected system, right? They're doing purchasing, they're doing receiving, and then corporate, they're gonna send you the invoice. So there's a big chasm between all this supply chain going on here. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in transactions and sales. But again, purchasing and receiving, and then there's this thing called core exchanges that lives over here. We talked about that at one point in a process earlier. But if you think of the problem with the disconnect, and so really the volume is 10,000 a week. Okay, wow, that's a lot. And when you don't have a three-way match, right? Everything's an exception. And so the challenge in this is you think about how do I get the POs? How do I capture them? First of all, how many can I get EDI where I don't have to key 10,000 a week? And maybe it's 15,000, maybe it's 20. Again, the problem has to scale. So you can't touch this data. And you think about streams of data and algorithms to match invoices and receipting, right? And all those things I talked about, variances, prices, incomplete, short ships, over ships, rules that govern that. And so you think about what we did is we built a front end app that, again, it catches all this. And again, it's a little bit of, it's not a full RPA, but if you think about taking people out of it and just giving people the 1% or hopefully less than 1%, because even 1% of 10,000 is 100 transactions that they have to go in and decide how to disposition, how to manage, but very complex. And the key thing is you got to move them through. You got to have velocity on AP, right? Because you've got payment terms, you've got discounts that are available. So, and again, you don't want your vendor to cut you off because you're not paying them because you've got a incompetent AP staff. So the complexities can go from there. Again, I can pause there, Sam, but there's a lot out there in AP.
So I love that story personally, and the reason why I love that is because when I look at the industries such as those, especially when you are talking about retail, the industries that are going to have any sort of physical stores, typically with them, if you are going to be looking at their ERP systems, as you correctly pointed out, that they are going to be disconnected. The other trend that I have personally noticed is those are going to be customer-less ERP systems. Okay, meaning they don't have any sort of customers in the ERP system. The only thing they are probably going to have is the vendors, and sometimes even they might not have the vendors because the only reason why they are using ERP system is just for the financial reporting. They don't necessarily understand what the role of ERP needs to be. And I don't know, Chris, if you have seen this trend in any other industries, but typically when I look at any of the B2C industries, that's where I see this trend as consistent. The other industries where I have seen this is going to be where, let's say you have one giant project, okay? So your operational complexity is not going to be as difficult from the customer perspective because the only thing you are doing is this one project you can probably manage in the spreadsheet. But from the vendor perspective, you might have 100,000 vendors applying to you. and then you have to track each of those vendors you have to recruit. So your vendor side of complexity may be far higher. So I don't know if you have seen similar trends in any other industries with respect to the vendor side of processes.
Well, yeah, and I think it goes back to, do they solve the problem with integration services? And I think as you go back to, where does your procurement happen, and sometimes it's POS side, to your point, or they have third party systems, but there's still an integration requirement that helps you close that gap, get that data closer to do the three-way matches. But by industry, again, disparate systems. Point of sale is a big one, because typically the stores are doing the buying, or someone's buying using their application. And again, you have to look at, well, how invasive is that integration? Because in the scenario I described, we fully replicated the inventory subledger. They'd create every PO that was created, showed up in the back office, every receipted against the POs, and then they could just pick it up right there. So that's a very complex set of integration services. A lot of companies don't want to make that investment. And why wouldn't they? Well, we don't lose that much money, right? Or we're not missing so much. And I think as you get into complexity and scale, that's what's going to necessitate a tighter integration. That's how it happens, because again, the PO, the receipt are over here, the AP is over here, and there's no three-way match unless you have that data behind the scenes.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Abu, I'm actually coming to you. And in my mind, I consider this as extremely legacy architecture. If you are going to be using ERP system either only for financial reporting, the only reason why you are bringing data is just to close your books, then your ERP system is probably not going to be helping you, because you don't have the financial insights embedded. You cannot really take the action as the transaction is moving in your funnel, whether you are talking about vendor side of transaction or the customer side of transaction. But a lot of industries, again, in the B2C space, in the energy, oil and gas, that's where you are going to see a lot of this trend. So from your perspective, when you look at the AP processes, what have you seen? How would you describe the scope? And maybe you might have any comment on the architecture as well.
Yeah, I think I've seen, both. I mean, so previously, if you go back 20 years, you'd have a lot of separate systems. ERP would mostly be your financial systems. Then it moved to a more integrated system. You're using ERP to pay your invoices, for your payments, receiving invoices, etc. But I think in the last 3-4 years, I'm seeing another trend again, where a lot of the receiving the invoicing function is going out to different apps, right? So they're doing OCR. A lot of traditional ERP systems, they don't do OCRs that well, right? They don't do routing workflows as well or as cleanly as a point-built solution. So lately, what I've been seeing is a lot of companies, they're still using the ERP, but it's hitting only for invoice entry at the end, right? So, but a lot of that front end, capturing the invoice, routing it to the right person for approvals, vendor setup, vendor approvals, obtaining banking information, all of that is, again, I'm seeing moving to a point-based solution which integrates with the ERP systems. One thing we didn't really capture, talk about was payments, right? Again, that's another disparate function that, ERPs don't handle payments that well, right? Sure, you can create some CSV file and stuff, but, there are lots of other point solutions who make it easy for you to do it, but integrated, your bank's connected right within that system. So a lot of things are happening in the accounts payable world, and a lot of point solutions are coming up, which are challenging the traditional role of the ERP system, I believe. So.
Okay, so very interesting layers there. So let's do a little rundown of these, point apps. And I'm completely, convinced overall from the vendor experience perspective that they probably need to have slightly more easier apps. The payment is going to be great, but let's talk about the integration challenges. Okay. Yeah. So when let's say if the point app is going to be just the UI extension of the ERP, and the way I like to define the UI extension of the ERP, meaning you have live connection with your ERP, the only thing you are doing is you have sort of, simplified the UI, and you are talking live to your database. So you don't have to maintain the separate vendor record in your instance. If you are maintaining separate vendor records, then you are opening another can of worms, how the reconciliation is going to be, vendor is sitting in 5 different systems. And by the way, so you are talking about, okay, vendor collaboration is just one aspect. You have ERP, PLM, okay? Where is PLM in the equation? So if you are going to have a lot of R&D processes, you probably need to have PLM, because sometimes these PLM are going to be, they are literally integrating with your Adobe Illustrator. Okay, your ERP will never do a good job of integrating with that, because your designers need to be using that, right? So you need that system as well. So if you look at, P2P, you look at ERP, you look at your vendor portals, you look at your PLM, you are looking at least 5 to 10 different systems, and these all are going to be storing the vendors.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare from the integration perspective.
Yeah.
So, do you have any sort of follow-up commentary in terms of the integration best practices?
So, I mean, it's definitely, a nightmare. I mean, you have to have one source of truth, right? So, for example, if you're sending vendor from an architecture's perspective, all those apps should be obtaining that vendor information from the ERP system, because generally that's where all the data is ending up being, right? But I think, there's like ERP tends to be, they do a lot of things, right? It has 1,000 features. But what 1,000 features really mean in the ERP world is you can't do it all the 1,000 features really well, right? So there's always going to be gaps in those 1,000 features. So what I'm seeing in the AP space quite a bit is people are going for these point apps because they've made it so easy, right? The users are, they are driving the change, right? So integration is an issue. A lot of apps come pre-integrated, so that will define the architecture as well. But the key thing obviously is going to be having one source of truth for the vendor data. We're not changing it. But with the iPhones coming in, with the younger generation coming in, I feel they want that simplified UI. They want to click a few. They don't care about anything else, right? I think that experience is putting a lot of pressure on the traditional ERP world.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. So, Nirav, I'm actually coming to you. Okay, so there's another layer overall from the integration perspective. Obviously, you can offer any sort of commentary based on whatever we discussed so far, any sort of context that you can provide in terms of what you have seen from the AP perspective. But one comment that Abu mentioned, I want to touch on that, and maybe you can offer some commentary as well. So a lot of IT folks, and when you talk about these technical architectures, integration architectures, there's a lot of noise in the market overall. Okay, they don't probably understand the concepts at a deeper level, but they all want to talk about it. And one of the concepts that is sort of floating around is going to be multiple sources of truth. Okay, so if you really look at from the integration perspective, everybody's going to say, if somebody has been there around the block for the last 30 years, they are going to say single source of truth. You have to have single source, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, so but there is a concept for multiple source of truth, and there is a certain assumptions in the multiple source of truth architecture as well, the way it works. But most people just don't understand. In their mind, they are thinking multiple source of truth, store data wherever you want, then we can figure out the reconciliation later on. But there is a foundational assumption overall in terms of the multiple source of truth as well. So any context, comments over comments so far, and the multiple source of truth? Nirav, over to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. An emerging trend, to say the least. But yeah, the multiple source of truth is something I've been seeing, a lot of times customers, before they're coming out to ERP systems, they already have apps that they're using, right, for vendors. And then they're coming off, maybe they have another set of vendor codes in an Excel file. Now they want to bring those vendor codes and Excel file into their ERP, but in the app that they're using, they have another set of vendor codes that they're paying. But what I'm seeing is that there is a mapping exercise. Yeah, there is, these different, same vendor, different, codes itself. But I'm seeing that there's a mapping exercise where when you are integrating between third-party solutions and the ERP system, they're able to pretty easily map over those vendors properly back into the ERP system. Because ultimately what it has to come down to, are we booking the journal entries correctly, right? Regardless of where we're doing the transaction, where are we holding the financials? When we're paying a check or we're getting in an invoice, right? Where is that financial flowing into, right? So whether that invoice is being done on vendor Z, and then that's a vendor X and the ERP system, there's a mapping that's being done. So subledger is being updated. You see what the payable is of that vendor Z in the other system. That's a vendor Y in one system, right? As long as that mapping is there, I think you could hold multiple, kind of source of truth in that sense. In essence, and a lot of that is, for example, look at a company for GE, right? For example, GE could have so many different vendor sites, right, where you send checks to, where you could send POs to, essentially, right? But that's maintained in one database, and the ERP has GE essentially, as a separate set of code. But they all have to be mapped together, I feel like, in order for that to be successful.
Okay, so very interesting layer there. Any other additions that you might have overall from the
Yeah.
context perspective, from the if you look at the AP processes,
Yeah.
what is the scope of the AP processes? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's big. We've been touching a lot of it, right? A few points that that I think is worth mentioning, because a lot of companies are doing this more and more. Dropship, right? What's happening in the dropship process with the vendor, right? The vendor is being selected on the sales order side, essentially, right? And then the purchase order is being created, tied back to the customer location on the purchase order, and the receiving and invoicing has to happen from a purchase order standpoint, right? How is that relationship? Right? How is that when is the goods being delivered to the customer? What does that communication look like? Are you receiving in a note of good of receipt from the vendor? Or are you just receiving in the invoice directly from the vendor? That you want on the other side, on the AR side, what we talked about last week, is to hit cost of sales right away. Right? That's a whole loop right now. That's, I think, a hot emerging trend of drop shipping. More and more drop shipping. We're eliminating storing products, especially for distributors. Look at vendor portals. Is another trend where customers really like, where vendors have their own portal that they want you to go into and look at, what bills have to be paid, how bills could be paid. They want to be able to access your system. That's another way of efficiency on the vendor, on the AP side, right? What about employees are vendors? We forget about that, right? Employee expenses, right? You have field service, you have people out there. How do you manage your employee expenses that are coming in? Do those expenses, when they get recorded in, do they have to be distributed to certain jobs, right? How are you recording that cost of it, essentially, right? Because your employee is a vendor. Are you making your employee happy by paying them timely, processing that AP, correctly, right? And then how are they capturing that expense, right? Are they using a third-party app? Are they submitting paper receipts, right? What is the technology there that they're utilizing, essentially? Landed cost. You get freight, you have material coming in all the time, right, from vendors, but they're shipping on your own FedEx account or UPS account. How is that landed cost coming in and then attributing back to the item cost, so you get a true unit cost for the item, right? If you're doing average costing, if you're doing FIFO costing, ultimately, right? So how is landed? How are you using? Are you properly utilizing the functions for landed cost? Is your inventory costing all messed up because your payable on the vendor on the logistics side is all messed up? Right? You need to be able to merge that together properly to get accurate costing, get accurate cost of goods sold, to see what our margins are. Ultimately, fixed assets, prepayments on a purchase order, right? A lot of times when you order fixed assets, you need to pay something before you even receive it in. What controls are in the system that allows you to go ahead and create what we call a prepayment invoice before receiving something in, so you can kind of check out the door to the vendor, so they could continue creating this fixed asset for you, whatever that is. Right? In terms of, from that perspective, you have AP automation. We touched on that a little bit. Chris had a really good example of a customer that has 100 different locations, and they have thousands of AP coming in. Well, something, you can't go ahead and log all that in manually. OCR, right? I think Abubakr talked about OCR. Being able to bring that in via OCR, where that technology, the AP automation, is so easy to use for a customer that you could easily map a vendor invoice. Maybe it has to go through an approval process, but it's really a touchless system. The vendor invoice gets emailed directly to a centralized email address, gets OCR'd, gets approved, bam, it's an AP now, right? Totally touchless. Now the AP department is handling exceptions. When it comes for payment, they'll go ahead and pay it ultimately, right? And positive pay. Right, positive pay, electronic ACH, right? That's all stuff that we hear all the time from the AP. AP plays. Our customers, these are fraud prevention techniques and measures for vendors to be able to make sure that their checks are being cut and no one else is out there backdoor in the dark web cutting checks on their behalf when they shouldn't be, right? So all these things are out here, but you need to have a good ERP system in place to do all these things for you. Right? That's what I'm getting to. AP is critical. It could sink your business if you don't think of these things.
Okay, amazing. By the way, Matt is smiling because you are speaking his language right now. Positive pay and anything related to bank is Matt's territory, and that's why he's really happy. And by the way, see, if you are going to have that disconnected experience between your systems, okay, when you are going to have 5 or 6 different systems, good luck with your costing. Yeah. Good luck allocating your landed cost. Okay, exactly. It's not going to work, irrespective of what you are going to try. The more connected and the integrated the experience is going to be, sure, you can treat this as more of the estimation as opposed to having the real visibility into the actual data and taking action. But if you're going to have disconnected experience, number one, you are going to be doing a lot of data entry Okay, so
Yeah.
you're looking at army of accountants
Yeah.
to be able to do data entry and the reconciliation. Good
Yeah.
luck with that.
Well, landed costs, right? I mean, it's the freight, obviously. That's the one that comes straight to everyone's head. But people forget about, what about the tariffs that were just applied, right? That could be landed costs, right? What about the surcharges in gas a lot of times, right? The freight companies charge, right? All these things are landed costs, and we have to be able to account for that loaded cost at the end of the day. And how are we doing that properly in the ERP system? You need a good solution.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Nirav, for that. Matt, so I'm actually coming to you. Whatever you can add overall from the context perspective. Obviously, I would like this point, the multiple source of truth, with everybody, whatever insights that you can offer, and any other comments that you might have based on the discussions that we have so far related to AP.
Absolutely. So I think when it comes to multiple sources of truth, this is the one place where you are at the mercy of the other side. With AR, you can dictate to your customers how you want them to run. But with AP, you are at the mercy of the vendor. And if it's an established vendor, they're looking at it the same perspective that you're looking at with your customers. They want to get paid the most efficient. And if you're going to mess with them, it might be easier for them to cut you off than it is for them to get to your level. So you have to be forced into a potential for a multiple source of truth. So what you need to do in your architecture is, of course, come up with a plan of where the sources of truth are prioritized when there are discrepancies. Have a plan for it, because there will be one inevitably, but you can minimize it, and you can have an action plan that says, if this is where we go, this is what we do to accommodate that. Vendors are not going to hesitate to tell you when you owe them money, which will also help. People want to get paid. So it's unlike the customer situation where customers are like, oh, we don't want to pay you. This side, you have nothing to worry about there. To the banking end, I think that is a big place for efficiency. People don't realize that those banking services exist. And if your ERP, and our ERP does this, so I've actually wrote the files for it. So I did this for our first customer that did it about a year and a half ago, and we've now adapted it as part of a standard rollout where if you're in the US, you have your Nacha files. We will cut them the positive pay files with all the checks. We get them right over to the bank. The only thing we need from you is your contact at the bank with the email. Everything goes out to them so they can update your positive pay file daily, weekly, monthly, whenever, with all that information saying, this is what we want paid. This goes to your positive pay. Pay these checks when they come in. This goes to the Nacha files. Generate these EFTs or ACHs. Get these vendors paid. Cuts down on costs over time. When it comes to the layering, you have to come up with a good way to get things into the system. Now, we talked about it, APIs, EDIs, OCRs. All of that technology exists. I don't mind the concept of multiple apps here. I think that it's it's a necessary evil of ERP. So what you're trying to do is you can't come up with a true single solution, but what you have to do is come up with a smart plan of which solutions you're going to use. That may even be part of your vendor sourcing process. If that vendor's complexity is too much to be worth what they provide you, find another vendor. That alone is a hidden benefit, because time efficiency, measure the time of your staff acquiring these things. So you can look at that too. It's an area that people, I think, sometimes forget because they look at the fixed cost. They look at the hard costs. What did I get sent a bill for? They forget that you're paying employees. Pay those times. Oh, by the way, something that nobody talked about here, if you have a company that uses it, independent sales reps and 1099s, they're basically vendors. You got to pay them too to move your product. That's a payment, because guess what? If you're an independent sales rep who's selling 5-6 products from 5-6 different vendors, you want the guy who's giving you your commission check for whatever business you're moving the fastest. That's who you're going to do business with. You're not going to do business with somebody that's lagging. So that's another place where you've got to keep an eye on it. And that, again, links to your sales orders and all, because they're going to be giving you sales orders for your product. And they're going to say, like, hey, I got this water bottle here. Let's say that I'm an independent sales rep who sells water bottles. I just moved 5,000 water bottles to these retailers. They're going to retail them out. I want to get my commission on that sooner, because that's my livelihood. So keep that in mind when you're running your AP. Organize and have that source of truth where you're going to have multiples, but you have to hierarchical them. Fall back on one that you trust the most, one that you can integrate. That's a central integration point, whether that's a separate data warehouse or part of your ERP. Doesn't matter. That, I think, we define it based on the scope of the customer individually, because we will build those data warehouses when they need them. We will do it within the ERP when we need to. Our company is flexible enough, agile enough to do that. But you can get anything that you want out of it. So your goals should be efficiently calculating all this stuff, and then looking for the ROI on it. And that ROI may mean paying a few more dollars to a particular vendor because that unit cost might be higher, but the cost of getting everything into the system ends up being a total win for you and your organization.
Okay, so some very interesting layers there, and I especially appreciated the layers that you brought in for the 1099 vendors, and that is typically very complex process in general. The 1099 vendors could be for your company. You might be working with other distributors; they might have their own 1099 workers, and that even complicates this further. So the follow-up question that I'm going to have for you is going to be slightly more fun because this is coming from a competing solution, right? So so it's going to be a little fun for you, right? So the question is saying, I guess it depends on the ERP. Acumatica integrations are relatively painless if there is an open API. I'll tell you my perspective first, and then Matt, you can probably address this as well. Okay. So sure, I get the argument about the open API. I get how easy it is going to be with respect to API, but do not forget the design and the architecture. APIs do not provide the design and architecture. Okay, and we are going to be talking a lot, and obviously I need to talk to Chris as well with this whole notion of multiple sources of truth, because that is far more complex in general in accomplishing that. So Matt, your perspective overall when you look at the open API, what's your perspective when it comes to this comment?
So open APIs are great. Now our system has them as well, very similar to Acumatica's, which makes them relatively painless. We'll even do the configuring for you, or you can configure them yourselves. We actually give you the API keys as part of our solution, so you can do it yourself or have us do it. We have customers who go both ways. They will do it themselves. They'll have us. I agree with that. However, you have to know ERP limitations. A lot of ERPs or a lot of other softwares have API call limits. What do you do when you're moving past that call limit and you can't get the data in? Someone just made a comment about it boils down to how your accounting perspective is. That's the other thing. Got to talk to your CPA. What do they want to see on the general ledger when they're doing taxes? The last thing you want to do is code something wrong that it leads to you paying more taxes or having something coded incorrectly. It all ties back to what you're going to show on a P&L. If you need to get loans, lines of credit from banks or anything like that, those services require accurate general ledgers. I was a corporate banker for 4.5 years. I went through those financial statements. We ate them alive when people asked for money. You had to. So you want to make sure that you are guiding it. APIs are great for transferring data, but you have to be smart about what data you're transferring to make sure that it's hitting the right spot, because APIs still have assumptions involved. They open up a certain key, a certain field, and they correspond to a certain key in a certain field. And all they're doing is just pinging the same thing back and forth. But that doesn't solve the fact that if it's bad data in, you just have bad data everywhere. So you need to audit what's coming into there and make sure that your CPA is on board with how you're going to do it. So when you configure it and turn it on and go live, you want to have that.
Yeah, could not agree more. I think great comments overall about how things are going to be coded, and also about the CPA comment. I completely agree with that. So Chris, I'm actually coming to you. So number one, obviously multiple source of truth. We need to address that, and I really don't think a lot of people understand what multiple source of truth means and what is going to be the implication of that on the architecture. Typically, when you are thinking of multiple source of truth, you are looking at the master data. Master data is where the real challenge is, and master data is going to be more in terms of when you are going to be locating the vendors in multiple different systems, and that's where the real trick overall is. So that is number one question that you may want to touch. The second is obviously this question, if you have any perspective on the API as well, and any other stories, sure, Chris, that you might be able to offer.
Sure. And you go back to the disparate systems, and the pinch point is just, it's reconciliation, in the two sources of truth. And, even in the integration example that I have, when it was all bolted together, it's been working. Why is it breaking? Why does it stop working? Well, hello, you changed something here. You didn't put something here. So even in a fully integrated system, and I'm not kidding you, these people, it was 8,000 hours of development on this, massive, but exceptions show up. And why do things fall apart even when they're fully integrated? Imagine if they're not integrated. Then you don't know things are falling apart because at least the records are failing. But again, vendors, somebody set it up. Oh, we got a new vendor. Well, it didn't go through accounting, didn't go through AP, but you just ordered something. We already got it. We already received it, right? Left hand, right hand don't communicate. So there's a perfect example. But again, even in where they're bolted together, seemingly, you percentages. You're still working with margins of errors due to just human coordination. And I think there's always going to be the human element there. But so as you hear that, fully integrated, I'm saying 1%, less than 1%, you hope. Non-integrated, your interruptions and just the rework is what it's called. There's coordinating. People don't track that human time, that loss of human time. But, again, if you're trying to scale an organization, is that labor and efficiency, it really becomes killer. And again, the accuracy. And then what happens is the reconciliation becomes overwhelming. Like, oh, well, how many records are we looking at? Ooh, there's 10,000 that don't match. Oh, you get it, right? And so now those complexities magnify. And now, and if you clear those, that hits the P&L and it's $1 million in loss. Ooh, so, we've heard everybody talk about GL entries. Okay, so it's a big deal. And again, the cleanup and the reconciliation, imagine paying your accountants tens and tens of thousands to go through every invoice and verify this invoice is in the system, this invoice is in the system. Oh, you got duplication. There's firms that go out and do that stuff for you. They charge a percentage of everything they find. So again, to get it right on the front end is imperative. And again, the two systems, where's the truth? Because I think we heard that before. There's got to be decision tree if there's an ambiguous situation as to what overrules what. But in the end, it's a paper manual rec where you really have to go back and look at the individual transactions. You don't want to be there, especially if you're a big company. Small companies, again, these apps for billing, great. And it's simple. They're not doing complex products and purchasing and maybe outsourcing and subcontractor relationships where they've got distributions related from procurement into projects. Those integrations through the APIs, this swell in complexity. And I think it's very true that simple stuff, easy peasy. Hey, Bill.com, great, easy peasy. But then those are small orgs, or more simple purchasing, or they're really not tracking all the data would be the bigger answer. They're simplifying and they're letting a standard AP. The POs are being done in Excel or Word. There's, and again, you would probably find a lot of stuff's off book because bigger organizations. But APIs, right? There's limitations. And again, in our world, in the Dynamics world, you're like, hey, Business Central, great APIs. That's exactly what you're going to do. Perfect, right out of the box, easy peasy. Oh, but I want to integrate that AP and distribute it to a project. That API runs out of capability. Then you get a customization. What you end up doing is you make almost call it a hybrid API, custom entity. It's a custom destination so that you can drive your data into the format that you're really trying to. But again, everybody grows out of those things. Even in the bigger system, the 365 F&O, same thing. Lots of standard destinations. Nobody wants to do the easy stuff. That's what I would say. Everybody's got it. Well, I want to do something extra. Anyway, lots of comments.
Okay, so some great comments there. Okay, and the follow-up question that I'm going to have for you is related to the comment that we just got, from one of the guests, and then we are going to be covering that as well. But really, it's about the processes. If you are going to have multiple systems in your architecture, it's going to be really hard because you have to define the process boundaries of each of the system. You have to identify the source of truth, and the way you mentioned that you need to have that decision tree and the conflict resolution process among your system. This is not about people. This is about system. They follow the same hierarchy when you are going to be doing that. So there are three systems that are really important in the case of your AP side of the processes. And those probably need to be integrated in a lot of different industries, depending upon how thick their processes are going to be. Number one is going to be PLM. Number two is going to be ERP. Number three, if they are using some sort of P2P system. Okay, so these three systems. So Chris, let's say if I want to ask you, okay, how would you define the process boundaries? What is going to be the role of PLM in the architecture? When the process is going to be handed off to your ERP, when the process is going to be handed off to your P2P, and what is going to be the collaboration between them? So let's say if you were doing sort of the arrows and boxes between these three systems, how would you do that?
And when you say the P2P, what are you talking about in the point of sale, or which P2P?
This is going to be procure to pay. So this is going to be systems
to
such as
separate procurement system. So it gets interesting because you look at the PLM where the engineers are in there and they're doing research with potential vendors for a design. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that? So on that front end engineering design process, so great. So are they talking to accounts payable about setting up new vendors? And again, when does a bill of or an engineering design go through a procurement process? And so in an external P2P, I still think that the ERP system is going to have a lot of the controls of that front end portion of the procurement process. I don't see that being completed externally in an app, frankly, in larger organizations. And again, is the engineering teams and the PLM, are they talking? And again, as I look at the integration tools that I have, they're going to set up products. Again, are the vendor designations coming across from the PLM? It really depends on how good they did their job. But a lot of those are integration points in the more robust CAD to ERP integration platforms. So again, now when we go to an external P2P, okay, so what's external? We're doing purchasing and so forth. So again, now who's syncing to who? Is the PLM going to a third-party P2P? I have not seen that in the architectures that I work with. So the external, I've seen procurement systems, but not where there's complex engineering and going on. In the aircraft and the aviation space that I play in, and some of the aerospace contractors, PLM integrated the ERP. Again, the procurement systems, if they have anything, there may be some punch-out stuff, but not a lot of third-party in those contexts. Sorry.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for those insights. So, Abu, I'm actually coming to you. Before that, I'm actually going to cover some of the comments here. Then we can talk about these comments as well if you have any sort of insights. So we have a lot of them. So one of the users, and I don't know who this person is because their name is not coming. So maybe change your LinkedIn setting. You can change that so that your name is going to appear here. But you are saying that finally some Acumatica representation. That's not true at all because we have had Dave Dozer for a very long time. And obviously he represents Acumatica as well. But thank you so much for the comment. Here we have one more comment. It all boils down to how good are your accounting perspective. And again, I think when I think about this perspective from the accounting, and obviously you guys can add your commentary as well. But accounting has a lot of different layers as well. If you are going to be thinking accounting's role only in your financial reporting, there's not much you can do. I mean, it's very passive, it's very legacy in my mind. But if you are really embedding your accounting at each step of the process and you have the insight of the cost and profit margins at each step, that's where the real magic is of ERP. So again, the accounting perspective is very subjective. Some companies like to treat it as more of the legacy back-end accounting. But if you're looking at the modern architecture, that's where you're going to have that integrated experience. Some more comments here. All the leaders in the ERP address this provided your account and finance team is clear. I'm not too sure if I follow this comment. If you guys have any insights there, you guys can speak. No. Okay. Let's move to the next one. Of course, P2P and tax. PTP and tax needs to be part of that. PTP, not too sure about that either. Is he referring to P2P, or is there anything P2P that I'm not able to relate? Any commentary? Anybody?
I think what Anil is trying to say, and I'm making an assumption here based on the comment prior with the ERPs addressing with the finance team. If you have your financial rules of what you want in the reporting, then the P2P taxes, this goes to what we said about tariffs and all landed costs. I think that's what Anil is trying to say.
Interesting.
I might be wrong in that. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but yes. And then to his final point, the data and process. That is the key because you need to map it all. And when we do an ERP implementation, that's one of the best things one of the most important things we're looking at. We spend, before we even upload a single line of data into our system, we've defined all of those factors because otherwise you're just putting a spreadsheet somewhere and it's not going to mean anything. So I agree with the point, assuming that it's the point that I'm making based on the comments. And I think it's very important. Design. Okay, so I did get it right. The planning is very key. We actually dedicate everything that we do to that point because we storyboard it before we even touch an implementation for that exact reason. For one of our customers that came on, they are, I believe, the United States, at least at the time, they may still be, the United States' largest manufacturer of custom labels. So any type of label or tag, they are the largest manufacturer of states. They're a customer of ours. They were using multiple systems to try to manage everything, and not just the AP side, but everything. Well, if you're acquiring paper for this and glue to put the labels on and all the other parts that go into the inks, the everything, they could not do costing until they got onto our system. In fact, they gave us ideas that have become templates that we've used for other customers, costing and whatnot. And I've really enjoyed that because that is a place where we took their process and defined it. they single-handedly sold another customer 3 years later because they were a reference. And I said, I was going through my process with them, and they said they were in the same situation. They were using the exact same software stack that my label maker was making. This company makes parts for boats, of all things. It's completely different. But I said, you know what? I had somebody who's in your boat 3-4 years ago. Talk to them. I shared the contact info. A week later, they didn't even have a formal demo with me. Because I'm, and I had done demos with them, and I was like, I had done discovery calls, but I hadn't actually demoed anything in our software. They called me back. They're like, can you send us a quote for what you did for them? So I drew up the quote. They sent it over. They approved it. They didn't even need a demo because the process, they were so sold on it from everything that this Fred said. Process matters. Map it out.
Exactly, could not agree more. And I think you are so right that the biggest issue that you are going to have in your siloed experience is always going to be in your inventory, in your costing. That's where you are going to see most implications. Landed cost, okay? You can never get it right if your data is going to be all over the place in many different systems. Thank you so much, Matt, for that. I have some more comments that we can cover, and you guys can offer commentary if you guys have anything. Just unmute yourself and offer anything that you might have. So I think Anil is agreeing as well that data and processes are going to be super important. The other user is agreeing with us as well that any ERP will fail if processes aren't defined. That is so true. It cannot be truer than that, to be honest. Okay, it's always going to be garbage in, garbage out. So make sure your processes are defined and the system boundaries are defined as well. That is equally critical and important. So Matt, good job. I think he's agreeing with you. Some more comments here. Not sure why you can see my info. So now, James, I think we can see your info. Great. Thank you so much for joining. Wonderful. So Abu, I'm actually coming to you. Any comments over comments, any stories that you might be able to offer?
Sure. I mean, I'll take a devil's advocate approach here a little bit. So, I mean, if open APIs were so great, a lot of companies would be out of business here, right?
Exactly.
MuleSoft and all of those billion-dollar companies, right? So, we all sell our systems. Oh, we have great open API. You can integrate in minutes. Never happens, right? So
Yeah.
I'll be honest about that, right? So,
Exactly.
as soon as you start integrating, you discover, the product architecture is different. I cannot create a product because the other software is restricting it, for example, right? So there's so many restrictions, and then you have to do mappings of data. Then you need a third-party software just to make the two software talk, right? Or you start writing custom code, and then you have to maintain that custom code. The other thing, data is obviously absolutely important, right? So we recently missed some of our payments from one of our customers because they forgot to add a zero in our address. So we're not getting payments for the last 3 months. So we had to go in and tell them, hey, your data is wrong about us, right? So data is important. The addresses, all of that can become a big problem if it's not properly maintained. You have multiple addresses, you have multiple deliveries, or multiple payment addresses in some case as well. The other thing is about processes. So what I'm seeing in the world, process is definitely very important. It has to be mapped. But what I'm seeing over the last few years is that focus on mapping process is going down by the end customers. What they are expecting is that the software is going to bring a lot of that process in, right? So if you go 10 years ago, you look at all those waterfall methodologies, you have 3 months just to map out the processes, right? That SAP, Oracle kind of strategies. But at least in the mid-sized sector, when they're buying software, they're saying this software should work for industry and it should map already existing 85% of the processes, right? So, in my, and I sort of see why the customers are saying that, because they're expecting the software to do a lot more for them than what they previously expected, right? So data, absolutely very important. Process mapping, yes, it's important, but not as much maybe as it was 8 years ago, right? Customers are expecting a lot of, differences. Again, I would say, a lot of young people are coming out there. They're used to seeing an app on their phone and it just starts working, right? So whether in reality that's there or not, but the expectation and the buying decision is definitely moving towards making ERP simpler to implement, easier to maintain, easier to learn, and quicker to roll out. So that's what I would say on those aspects.
Okay, amazing. So, Nirav, I'm actually coming to you. Comments over comments, any stories that you might be able to offer related to AP?
Yeah, no, I would say get off of Excel as fast as you can. Go paperless as fast as you can, right? With vendors, come up with an AP automation strategy, right? You don't need to hand key in AP invoices. Acumatica, for example, as part of a standard footprint, has AP automation, right? There is no third party, right? Where you find an ERP solution that has more, embedded solutions than actually third party solutions, the way you want to go. So you're not having to deal and juggle with all these different APIs and all these other things going on, right? So find solutions that have a lot of this already in its base. It's gonna make your life easier at the end of the day. But try to take your discounts at the end of the day when you cut checks for vendors, right? Do landed cost properly. It all comes back to your AP processes. Define your processes ultimately, and streamline your workflows. AP is one of those areas that it kind of sits in its own island, but it doesn't have to. Bring it back in. Put that fishing rod back in. Bring everybody back in. So we could start having some good logical communication with vendors and how we're paying vendors and what type of invoices are we getting in and what is the cost of processing our AP invoices, right? I said something similar last time on the AR side. What is the cost of our receivable? Processing that, but what is the cost of our AP, right? Let's lower that cost. Let's add more value in your processes.
Okay, amazing. So I don't know if you are going to have any sort of follow-up comments on these comments. So I'm actually going to open up some more comments here from James, and we have some more. So he's saying open APIs are only as good as the endpoints that you can map. The only thing I would add there is it's also people who are mapping that. It's also going to be the skill set. So so that is going to be equally critical as well. And obviously, Nirav, you can add there as well. But one more comment that I will read for you. So Anil is saying, I would add one more aspect apart from data and process. Important to have integration within teams, not software, but process and data connection, how everyone sees them. There's a well-known story of 5 blinds understanding elephant. Could not agree more. Okay, first, define your physical processes, integration workflows, decision making, how your teams are going to be exchanging the information before you think about the software. But it's going to be equally critical for the software as well. If you cannot define that, garbage in, garbage out. Nirav, any commentary on these comments?
No, I think Anil's hitting it right on the head. Garbage in, garbage out. You need to be able to process these AP invoices timely, pay your vendors timely. Abubakr, a great example. Our vendors they're missing a zero, so we couldn't get paid ultimately, right? So how can we eliminate that, right? How can we eliminate that miscommunication, that that data not properly being passed across correctly? So again, humans are running this, right? A lot of it, humans are running it. They're entering this information in. So it's important to take a hard look at where could we eliminate any human error as much as we can.
Okay, amazing insights. Thank you so much, Nirav, for that. So Matt, I'm coming to you. Any other comments over comments of these comments, as well as any other stories that you might be able to offer?
Absolutely. I want to follow up on one of Abu's points, which is about younger people wanting an app. Now I'm 33, so I love apps, but I also understand, and this is working in ERP and knowing this, if you have an app that does one thing, it only does that one thing. Sure, that one thing is easy, but there's a hinge point, because that one thing might be really easy, but then it's got to integrate and it's got to go through that. Every problem has a difficulty. You're only choosing where it is. I like it to running things up on a credit card. You have to pay the bill eventually. You can only swipe the card so many times. The bill comes due. So when you have that app, you got to choose your hinge point. Do you want it to be easy data entry for people that are putting that in, but then deal with the problem later? Or do you want to head it off with how people get the information into the ERP system, how it integrates with everywhere else? It's entirely up to each organization, and it's different for every organization, even ones within the same industry, because it's all about the people that are operating that system. But it is something to think about, and it is something that when you're selecting an ERP, you should definitely be asking about what are your system's hinge points, because every automated process has to come from something being entered, and then it has to be checked on at different points. You can automate different areas of the workflow. Our system has some very unique ones that are different, and we find ourselves, my sales team finds themselves very frequently having to explain that. We chose those points because nobody else does them that way. And in a lot of cases, we find that it gives us a leg up advantage where we have a successful implementation where other products don't. We chose it that way. We built it by design that way. Nothing wrong with it. It's an agnostic view. It is just you need to pick the point.
Okay, amazing insights there. So, I'm going to do one open floor question. Anybody can address that, whoever has insight. So, keep yourself on unmute if you like. So one of the scenarios that we did not cover in detail, that is going to be really payment. We touched a little bit that, you are probably going to have workflow, and based on that, you can probably process the payment. But one of the trends that we are seeing overall from the supply chain perspective, when you are going to be working with the international vendors, there are going to be many different complexity overall in terms of the payment. And typically that actually throws off your supply chain planning, the lead times, whatever you have to do. So I don't know if you guys are seeing any interesting issues there. Some of the customers, the way they like to handle the prepayment with the international vendors is going to be, they sort of do the negative balance on the chart of account, which is a very crude way of doing it, right? So anything that you guys may be able to offer based on the scenario that I just mentioned?
I mean, we have a lot of customers who would procure materials from, overseas, and, they'll be doing prepayments, or they'll be doing it the other way around. But generally they would be added to a liability account. So if it would be tracked in an accrued liability, right? So it's not, the service has not been delivered yet, and then they'll keep on deducting it from that account, right? So that's what I have seen. I've not seen a negative GL per se. It will be tracked separately on the balance sheet, all the prepayments that have occurred.
So typically the challenge is going to be, I guess, in the accrual process, because, let's say if you are doing monthly close, and if your PO is in this particular month, and then you are going to be getting the delivery because of the supply chain delays, let's say after 9 months or whatever, then, you have to probably track that as the accrual. Sometimes, that becomes a little bit of a challenge for companies.
Yeah, I mean, most of it, I've seen them doing manually, even at larger companies, because there's so many factors that come into play in calculating those, how much to accrue, what to accrue, depending on the industry. For example, if it's a project based, then, is it milestone based? Is it, on what basis are you going to accrue the cost, right? So depending on the kind of industry, they will treat it differently. If it's a product based industry where you're actually physically receiving, smaller, product, distribution kind of firm, then it's relatively easier. If you're project based, then it becomes more complex, generally.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that. So now we can take only the closing advice, super short closing advice, Chris.
So we didn't talk about security. It's a big deal around the payables process. If you think about, you're moving money out of the organization, fraud, again, separation of duties are words that are come to mind as you think about cutting checks and bank reconciliation and all the loose ways that cash can leave the building. Food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Abu.
I'd definitely say, security. I'll echo that what Chris said. We've had a few very high-profile cases here in Calgary where University of Calgary paid $10 million to a vendor, just because they received a fake email. So, so definitely that would be a very critical aspect.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. Nirav, closing advice, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's minimizing, I guess, data entries as much as you can in the AP process, creating that security around which vendors are being paid when, essentially, and all the other operational side of AP, taking a look at how you're interfacing with your item costs, landed costs, drop shipping, prepayments. It's all functionality that's really important on the AP side.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that. Matt, super short closing advice, please.
Final piece of advice, the one thing we didn't talk about: when you're paying international vendors, agree on an exchange rate.
Okay, love it. Thank you so much, Matt, for that. So that's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We are going to come back with another topic. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight.
Have a great night.
Take care. Bye.